In this second video, we will be combining what we have learned about good programming practices and loops with a new data structure called a list in Python in order to build our Python skills and advance the types of things we can do with this programming language. The code we have generated thus far in the cell will clear any previous image off the screen and create for us a circle with a given radius. And we've stored the specific value of 150 into a variable named radius so that we could change this value at will. And here we see the circle that generates, which is rather large. What I would like to do is create a series of smaller circles inside the larger circle of various colors. For example, if I were to do that without loops, one thing that I could do is change the value within radius by reassigning it a smaller value and then asking the turtle module to create another circle with that new radius value. Line 4 right here is called reassigning the value within inside of radius because it was previously 150 and I have now changed it to hold 120. And we can see that that draws a smaller circle for us inside the larger circle. If we had wanted to change the color of that circle, the turtle module has a color command, and that color command can accept a handful of different arguments, but one of the best things about Python is that it will accept a good amount of standard color words if we encase them between quotation marks. So let's use the word red and encase that within quotation marks. Quotation marks in Python are how we indicate and communicate with Python that what we have is called a string data type. And all that means is it's an expression of something that we could type off of the keyboard rather than something like a number. So for Python to know the type of information that it's receiving helps it both store it properly and perform operations on it properly. Let's rerun this cell and see what that does. What we've done here is an example of something that I would like to do more generally. What I would like to do is draw a series of circles of decreasing radius. And from our last video, we have learned that we could probably do that with a for loop by just saying, let's repeat this process repeatedly, change the color with which we're drawing, change the radius with which we're drawing, and then render the circle. So these 3 lines of code could be encased within a loop. However, we have seen a good way to modify the radius, and we could do that systematically by sort of subtracting some designated amount repeatedly. But how are we going to change the color without physically retyping what the color is? And for that, I want to introduce the concept of a list. We have seen previously that the way that we can declare a variable and assign it a value is exactly what we've done here on line 2. The syntax for creating a list is very similar to the syntax that we see on line 2. We are going to create a variable, here just called myList, and we want to assign it a value, but we want myList to, in essence, hold several values at once. So to indicate that we would like myList to hold several values at once, we are going to use square brackets here. And then we are going to type out the several values we want myList to hold. Here, a sequence of colors separated by commas. And that's all we need to change in order to declare a list object. So while radius is an integer value, myList is a list object. And because myList holds several values at once, we can access the individual elements of that list by using a similar syntax to the declaration. So for example, if instead of writing the word red here literally, the better practice is to replace red with its variable name. Its variable name is myList combined with its relative place in line in that list. And Python does what's called indexing from 0. So the first element in the list, red, is myList in the 0th spot, while the second element in the list, orange, is myList in the 1st spot. And there are reasons for this. but that's just something to remember if you haven't seen it before. So just as instead of writing 150 literally on line 4, it's best practice to use its name, we can do the analogous thing on line 5 and not reference the color red in between those quotation marks literally, but replace it with its name. And its name is a combination of the name of the list and its position in the list. What this means is that if instead of red, I would have wanted orange or yellow in its space, I can change the number 0 to any other number that corresponds to a place within this list. So for example, if I would have wanted a yellow circle instead of a red circle, I could have simply changed this number 0 to the number 2 and re-executed this code, and I'll get the same picture, but with a yellow circle in place of a red one. So knowing how to use lists and access elements of the lists allows us to put these 3 lines of code inside of a loop. Let's add a loop that says for I in range of, well, right now there are 5 things in my list, so let's do for I in range of 5. Let's delete line 5 and indent these 3 lines of code and update them appropriately. To begin, let's pick a color. T.color my list. And here, this value I, that in the last video was a dummy variable, it's now a variable that can actually be used within the body of the loop to change the color of the circle I'm going to be drawing. So this I is going to iterate through the possible indices in my list and help us change the color. We can then change the radius of the list by subtracting, let's say by 30, just for fun right now, every single time. The way to write this looks a little funny, but what we need to know is that this line, line 6, which wouldn't make any mathematical sense, no number is equal to itself minus 30, is actually being communicated differently in a programming language than it would be mathematically. Assignments, which are what this equal sign means in Python, are done after computations. So the right-hand side of the equal sign, or the assignment operator, is a computation. So this line of code, line 6, is going to execute by first taking the current value inside radius and doing the computation to subtract 30 from it. Once we've done that, this number will be 120, and that will be assigned back to radius. So you need to read something like line 6, not like a mathematician would read line 6, but realize that the subtraction operator and all computation operators take precedence over this assignment operator. Once we've changed that radius and made the circle smaller, so we won't be drawing over the previous circle, then we will draw the new circle, and that's the body of our loop. So let's give executing this a try. Notice that there's no black circle since I deleted that line of code, but we can get this beautiful decreasing sequence of circles. If you'd like to know what happened here and why line 7 is underlined with red squiggles, there's actually an error message down here. We picked 30 at random, but we didn't think very far ahead. If our radius starts at 150 and we're subtracting 30 from it 5 times, by the time we get to the end of that list, we'll be able to change the color, but we'll have a radius of 0. And what's being communicated to us through this 0 division error is that our turtle module doesn't know how to draw a circle of radius 0. So there are 2 ways that we could improve this code to make it better. And I'm going to add those in comments, but I'm going to leave how to do those things up to you to think through. The first thing we could do is we can create a variable called myLength equal to the length of the list. So something like myLength equals, and then we can trade out this specific magic number for myLength. The power in that is that if I wanted to come back up to my list and add a value like purple to the list, I could do that and my code would continue to run without having to make a modification. So that's the first thing we could do to make this code better. The second thing we could do to make this code better is get rid of this other hardwired in number. 30 was something that we chose at random. Maybe if we want these circles to be somewhat equally spaced, but make sure that we can draw them all, we could create a subtraction value computed by dividing up the radius into equal chunks having to do with the length of the list. So something like subtraction val equals, and assign it a value. The goal being to replace this 30 with subtraction val to ultimately render a picture like this.